Good morning, everybody, to this webinar, Plan Smarter, Not Harder, your first look at VAPS. I'm excited that you're here and that you will spend the next 45 to 60 minutes with me to learn how to schedule smarter, not harder, and to get your very first look at a product that is called VAPS. Before we start, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Martin Karlovic, and here at Boyum IT Solutions, I'm Vice President SaaS Global Partner Success, which means that from a sales perspective, I'm responsible for our global SaaS business. And the VAPS is one of the products, and what we do for Business Central in general, one of the activities that fall from a sales responsibility under my role. If you have any question during the webinar, which we, by the way, will record and share later on our channels, then you can ask the question using the Q&A chat pane here, and then I will either answer right away or at the end of the webinar or after whatever a part of the demo. So if you don't have a question during the webinar, but think afterwards, oh, he said something that I would like to discuss in more detail, then also you can reach out to me at any time, either via LinkedIn or via email, maka@boyum-it.com. I have been with Boyum now since April last year, and before that I was CEO and one of the owners of Netronic Software. Netronic Software was a small German software company that my brother and I then sold to Boyum IT because we thought that within Boyum IT, what we did as very specialized products can and will scale much faster than if we would have continued alone. And one of the things we did at Netronic and where we were very good at was scheduling. And so the VAPS, the product that you are taking your first look at today, is actually a product that we from Netronic brought into the Boyum group, and where also I have been very instrumental in inventing it and bringing it to life. Before we go into the content, I just want to put this webinar into perspective. So typically when I do webinars, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page on what to expect and whom this is for. So typically we can, if we do it a little bit black and white, we can segment the content by, is this content for beginners or is this content for somebody who has been knowing our products and propositions for a long time and very well? And then we can also differentiate, is this a webinar where we look at certain functions and features, or where we take a deeper dive into certain business processes and best practices and how to accomplish them with our products and solutions. And this webinar is really here. It is an introductory webinar, which is meant for beginners, so for people who maybe never have seen the VAPS before or have seen some VAPS videos on YouTube and now want to get their first consistent introduction to the product and get going. So it will be, I will stay at the very surface of the VAPS, and then when I do demos, I will demo, of course, some basic features and functions, but I won't do a deep dive into the product. For the deep dives, there are zillions of YouTube videos that you can find of webinars that I did in the last 5 years. And I'm pretty sure that over the course or later this year, we will also come with much more advanced stuff webinars. So this webinar is an entry-level webinar where I will introduce a product to you, that is the VAPS. And then you might ask, what is the VAPS? Well, VAPS stands for Visual Advanced Production Scheduler. And when, with my old company Netronic, we released the VAPS really was the very first extension that we developed for Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central, that on the one hand provides both automatic finite capacity scheduling combined with drag and drop scheduling, and on the other hand, that was fully integrated into Business Central. So we are not looking at a scheduling solution that is outside of Business Central, where you send data to, schedule them, and then get data back into Business Central. But we are looking at a software solution where actually like the scheduling logic is developed in AL code. So it is all native Business Central, and everything happens within Business Central. That was pretty unique, and to my knowledge, it is still pretty unique. So we are the only one who doing this. And what is also unique is that we are combining drag and drop scheduling with finite capacity scheduling. So now, before we look at the product, and before I go into demo, I just wanted to make a very few like more conceptual remarks and also embed the topic into its broader context. So very first of all, when you now hear me talking, you hear me using the phrase scheduling very often. So it is like scheduler, scheduling. This is a slide with no words, but you see scheduling 3 times. However, you registered to a webinar that is called Plan Smarter, Not Harder. And now when we look at this, like we use 2 verbs, we use planning and scheduling, and somehow we use them here in the communication about this webinar as if they would be the same. And although I'm not a native English speaker, I'm from Germany, I always find it very, very important that we make a differentiation and that we think about the words that we use. And we also, in the end, should be very aware of the fact that planning and scheduling, although related to each other and intersected with each other, are 2 different pairs of shoes. So this webinar is not about planning, as the title indicates. It is about scheduling. It is purely about scheduling. I will not talk about planning. And planning and scheduling, as I have observed it with a lot of customers that I have been working with also directly, and also a lot of partners that I've been discussing it also in the podcast that I use to run the Business Central Manufacturing Show, planning and scheduling are 2 different tasks, and it's also 2 different processes. And if you work with larger clients, then you also have different people who are doing it. So you have a planner and you have a scheduler, and they do different things. And of course, they need to work with each other and not against each other, but they do different things. So if we simplify this, then planning is the process in which you make the decision what to produce and very roughly when to produce it. So you plan in bucket of time. You say, I need this quantity of this item by the end of that week. This is planning. You identify demand, and then you determine what to produce to satisfy this demand, how many, and roughly when. And then you have like created the supply for that demand. And then scheduling kicks in, because then you have to make the decision by whom, by which machine center, which work center to produce the single operations to fulfill that demand, and exactly when, and in which concrete sequence of orders. So on that machine, I do this first, that first, and on that machine, I do this first. So this is scheduling. So planning is rough cut. You decide what to produce, how many, and when, roughly, and scheduling very precise. Like scheduling is, it's in the end, behind the scenes, I think we are by milliseconds, so super precise. Which means you also have different instruments to do planning and scheduling. So typically, those teams within your customers that do planning, they use the planning, they work with the planning worksheet, the requisition worksheet, and all of these wonderful functions, providing really strong MRP capabilities within Business Central out of the box. Like this is one of the parts in manufacturing where Business Central, also compared to other ERP systems, stands out. But Business Central is not that good in scheduling. It has some capacity constrained resources, but really the definition of what to produce when against finite capacity, which sequence of order there, Business Central has no out-of-the-box tools. And this is where the VAPS kicks in. So the VAPS is a product to help customers doing this. And By the way, when we talk about scheduling and when we talk about what Boyum can provide to you or to your customers, we have two products that integrate with Business Central. And also, although we will focus one product today, the VAPS, I would like to mention both products because they might be very relevant for your customers, and it might be also relevant for you to know both products, to be aware of them, and also to know the difference. So I also would like now to embed the VAPS, the product that we will talk about very extensively in a couple of minutes. I would like to embed it into the overall picture of our product scope. And so for production scheduling within Business Central, we have two products. They are called VAPS and VPS. And if we think of them, you can think of them, okay, the one product, this is a product that is good for like the scheduling newbie. This is good for companies who are at the beginning of their digitization journey. This is a product which is good for companies that make their first steps also in using software solution for scheduling. So who kind of start that journey. And then we have another product that is more meant for the scheduling pros, for people who already have experience with scheduling software, with scheduling processes, with scheduling instruments, who also have like their data under control, because it makes no sense when you have rubbish data, rubbish routings and things like this, and then put this rubbish data into a super expensive scheduling software, then the results will be rubbish. It is garbage in, garbage out. We all know this principle, and a lot of customers who are at the beginning of the digitization journey, they need to work hard on their data to make the data suitable for like a scheduling pro solution. And the product that we have for scheduling newbies, for customers who are at the beginning of the digitization journey, this is the VPS, the Visual Production Scheduler, whereas the product, the more advanced products for the scheduling pros, is the Visual Advanced Production Scheduler. And the super good news for your customer is that with us, they can grow. With us, they can start small. They can start embracing software-based scheduling fully embedded into their ERP system on a very, very lightweight way with the VPS. And then when they grow, when they gain experience with scheduling processes, with scheduling technology, with scheduling software, then they do not have to switch the vendor. They can come to us again, and they can go from the VPS to the VAPS. And both VAPS and VPS are built within Business and on the exact same foundation. So making the shift is pretty easy. So if you now have manufacturing customers and you work with manufacturing customers and you are unsure, is the VPS the right product to present, or is the VAPS the right product to present? Or if you're a customer and you are not unsure, then I just would like to give you some characteristics that tell you, okay, for this type of customers, we might better start with the VPS. And for that type of customers, we will definitively need the VAPS. And so with the VAPS, with both products, it is always good when we start talking to customers and when we get into this conversation that we get an understanding, a fundamental understanding of how they are scheduling today. What are they doing to determine what is going to produce on which machine, by which person, when, and in which sequence of order? We can ask them these questions. And we can ask them, and typically, like those scheduling newbie companies, but also people, they use Excel, right? They use a whiteboard. So I have seen so many shop floors where there was a big whiteboard and they moved magnets around, or they had it on a cork board and then they put papers on there, and you saw like you saw colored paper there and a scissor, and then they were like cutting the boxes, putting it there, and then moving things manually around on this whiteboard, on this corkboard, on pieces of paper. All have a super smart person, and he or she has it all in her head. This is typically when they are not using digital solutions. They are using analog solutions, or they have like lightweight Excel sheets. And when you talk to them and when you say, what is your biggest pain point? Then it's the manual work, but it's also the lack of visibility and transparency. Like, what is going to happen if this machine breaks down? What is going to happen if I have to move that production order? So this is one pain point, but the other is also like they are overwhelmed by the scheduling task. They are really unsure where and how to start. They have looked at a couple of scheduling solutions, but they are just like, they are lost. And the first and the most important thing to give to them is not a super sophisticated algorithm, but it is transparency. The data that they have in their system, and in our case, it is Business Central, and make it transparent, make it beautifully and understandable, make it a Gantt chart look so that they can look at it and understand and say, oh, here is a gap, here is an overload, here is an issue. This will help them a lot. They do not need sophisticated stuff. And typically, these are smaller make-to-order companies. They have a manageable number of new production orders per day, maybe 10, maybe 20, but not that many. The processes are pretty straightforward. They have a couple of routing steps, very easy. Most of the time, they know where their bottleneck is. So maybe they have 5 or 6 steps in their routing, but they know the bottleneck. Okay, here's my bottleneck. They know this because always things pile up there. And they have a manageable process velocity. So they can explain also like their case, their processes in very easy words, but they are unsure where to start. So let's give them transparency. And then you have the other type of customers. They may use a product like the VPS. They may already have in their old system some kind of drag and drop capabilities, or they already used an ERP system, and with this ERP system, they have some scheduling software that they used in the past, and they also had some algorithmic scheduling. Or you meet those customers where you have 1 or 2 employees who are like the most experienced Excel wizards you have ever met in your life, and they built the most complete Excel spreadsheet you ever recognize. And then you ask like, okay, what is if you're on vacation? Well, if I'm on vacation, you know, I love this Excel sheet. I love this company. So I like keep it updated 2 hours a day, although on vacation. Or like they say, okay, when I come back from vacation, then I have to update it for 2 days in a row. So like, but this super complex beast, we all have seen this. And for them, because typically they pretty much know their scheduling challenge, for them, you will need more than just simple drag and drop scheduling. And if you ask them what their pain points are, of course, they lack visibility and transparency because these tools do not give it fully. They have all their flaws. And then they have like a high velocity in their processes and in their number of production orders. And oftentimes they also have too many constraints to handle manually. And then if they have too many constraints to handle manually, then they get in problems. So typically these are larger make-to-order manufacturers who oftentimes produce against a bespoke demand, so against a bespoke sales order, but they have standard items that they produce on stock beforehand and then they use for the final items. They also have typically a much higher amount of new production orders per day that they need to schedule. And for them, change is really the norm, not an exception. Change happens all the day. Change in routing, change in customer requirements, change in demand, changing capacity, all of this happens all over the place. And then they need something that is more automated to react to this change quickly. And so now, if these are the types of customers for whom those products are ideal, then let's ask ourselves what differentiates the product. What does the VAPS has, what the VPS does not have? And if we ask the question, then we also have to ask the question, what does the VAPS have, what Business Central does not have? Because in the end, the VPS is like a one-to-one view on the standard Business Central manufacturing capability. So with the VPS, you can do everything that you can do with Business Central manufacturing, but visually, like drag and drop, you see all the data and then you can move things around manually, but there is no own scheduling logic. So you can if you think of the VPS, if you've never heard about it before, it is a visual Business Central manufacturing capabilities for scheduling purposes. And then the VAPS builds on top of Business Central and builds on top of the VPS to provide functionality that those type of customers need. And in our point of view, there are many, and you will see many of them in the demo, but the biggest 3 important ones are the following. So first of all, when you do scheduling, and like a couple of minutes ago, you saw I'd like to play with words. We differentiated planning and scheduling. We also have to differentiate scheduling and execution. Also, scheduling and execution go hand in hand. What you schedule then must get executed on the shop floor. The execution on the shop floor then has an impact what is like how my next schedule should look like. So although these processes, like, they intersect, they should not always intersect, but you also have to decouple them, because when you work in the scheduling solution and when you build your scenarios, when you make your mind, should I squeeze this production order in here or here, then you don't want a shop floor system, like, for example, our produce software, you don't want to update automatically, but you want to decouple it. And then when the person who does the scheduling is done with her work, then she should have a save, or we call it the publish button, and then like the work order lists for the shop floor operators should get updated. So with the VAPS, we actually separate scheduling from execution, and we allow the scheduling person to build multiple simulations, multiple variations of the schedule before pushing the data back to Business Central. So this is a very big change, because in Business Central, you basically cannot do it, because when you make a data change, it automatically saves. This does not allow you to make any what-if scenario. Then the next thing, in Business Central, we have no scheduling logic. Well, if you ask Microsoft, there's a planning, maybe they call it scheduling logic, but there is not. So when you create a production order, of course, Business Central assigns times to this production order. Business Central does it backward. Take into account the times that you put in the routing, and take into account the times that you have in the calendar. But Business Central does not look at it from a capacity standpoint. It just gives you the latest point of time you need to start with this production order, assuming we have infinite capacity. This is not scheduling. This is like time assignment. Anyway, so with the VAPS, we have an own algorithm with which we do finite capacity scheduling, and we don't do it backwards. So Business Central backwards assigning of times, figuring out the by from the latest point in time that you need to start, assuming you have infinite capacity. We do finite capacity scheduling, and we want to give your customers a schedule that they can execute that is realistic. So we do forward scheduling and following the as soon as possible principle. And then last but not least, there's also, in my point of view, a gap in Business Central, and this is when it comes to material availability information on the production order. Business Central gives us a ton of material availability information, but they are all on the item card. When you go to the production order, you're like, let alone, you can look at the production order component lines, and then from there jump to the item cards. But if you have a BOM with 100 items, this is quite tedious. So with the VAPS, we not only have the finite capacity scheduling algorithm, but we have a second algorithm, and the output of this second algorithm is something that we call EMAT, earliest material availability date. And then we can hand this output of this algorithm to the scheduling algorithm as a further constraint. So that means when we do the scheduling with the VAPS, we look at the the biggest two constraints that every manufacturer has. We look at capacity constraints and we look at material constraints. And with this, I think I gave you like a conceptual introduction to the VAPS. So now let's look at the product itself. When I go to the demo, we all have to mentally go back in time, because the system that I used to do the demo now has a work date of the 31st of January 24. So we are in the process of updating everything, but here still, let's mentally jump back in time. But of course, only mentally. And then in the demo, I will show you like 4 things. So first of all, and this is preparational work, I will create a new simulation. So I will start a new scheduling, so to say. And once I have this, I will do 3 things. And you will recognize that these 3 tasks that I accomplish with the VAPS are tasks that all of your manufacturing clients have on a daily basis. So first of all, you will see that there's a bunch of new production orders that have to be scheduled. And I will schedule them automatically, all of them, and I will apply a priority-based scheduling. So then I have a new schedule. When I have a new schedule, I would like to understand if and then when I do this, I did this with capacity constraints. So then when this is done, I want to identify if I have any material availability issues, and I want to identify this quickly, and I want to solve it. So this is like the third or the second process that I go through, the third thing that I will show you. And then in the very end of the step of the demo, we get a little bit like we go one level deeper, and I will become a bit more fancier, because I will actually create a new demand from a sales order. And I will create it in a way that the production order to fulfill that sales order is reserved to that sales order. And I will do, when I create the sales order, I will do what salespeople tend to do. I will set not very realistic expectations. So I will come up with a demand date that we cannot meet capacity-wise. So then I will go to the VAPS. I will schedule it and get a realistic delivery date. This realistic delivery date will conflict with the demand date from the sales order. And we know how Business Central is when you have conflicts between demand date from a sales order and the due date from the production order, and you have reservations. And so I will handle all of this within the VAPS in a very automatic way. And then also, and this is really cool stuff, we can then communicate the realistic delivery date back to the sales team. And this is what we will do now in the next 25 minutes. And with this, let me try to get my BC system up here. Paused. Cool. Every good demo starts with a paused Business Central system. Here we go. So Business Central installed. You see a manageable amount of data, but I wanted to keep it pretty lightweight, so everyone who takes the first look at the VAPS can follow me. We have the VAPS installed, and when I click here, so I have it in. I think this is the Road Center Manufacturing Manager. So if you have the VAPS installed, then make sure you have the Manufacturing Road Center, because then the VAPS turns up here at the very bottom, at the very top. So then, if I go there, we see a lot of options. The user, the person who does the scheduling, will most of the time work in this simulations area. This is where I go now. And from here, like all activity, all day-to-day work starts. So then when I am on that page, I see I already created a simulation like before the start of this webinar. So I did some last preparations, always just in time, as Business Central is. But anyway, so then let's look at this page, and you see a lot of buttons here, and they are in a like logical order. So the first thing to do is to calculate the earliest material availability date, and we have two options. I just do it now here manually, so I trigger the generation of the earliest material availability date information. With my limited set of data, this is pretty fast. In live custom environments, this can take up to 20 minutes, so it can take longer. So we recommend that you trigger this earliest material availability date allocation or calculation from the job queue, which you easily can do. So then it's always calculated during the night when you have less load in the system. So now that I have latest earliest material availability date information, I have to create my simulation. So I have to define what type of production orders I want to schedule. And I have to define it by two dimensions, by the status of the production order and by date range. So in my case, I say, okay, the minimum status of a production I want to see is firm planned. So which means I only want to see firm planned and release production orders. And from a time range, I want to look 5 days back to see if I have some leftovers, so things that I wanted to do yesterday and I didn't complete. And I want to look 3 months into the future. And then when I set this and click OK, then we look for all production orders that are firm planned and released 5 days back, 3 months into the future. And then we copy them into a separate table that we call the simulation table. And now that I have this, I can actually view it, so I can see the data graphically to get some transparency, which all your customers most likely do not have, because this is the reason why they came to you. So then this is loading. Can take a bit, but still acceptable, even if we have much more data. And then we have the VAPS, like the visual schedule, open, and now we can deal with the data. Before and this was, by the way, like create the simulation. This was the first thing that I wanted to show you. So part of this demo accomplished. So before I start interacting with the schedule, let's very quickly look what we have here, and really quickly. On the top, we have the time scale. The time scale, of course, is very important for us to give us like the time orientation, but it is also a navigation help. So like, as I said, for me, it is the 31st of January. So if I want to look at the current week, at week 5, I click here, it spans on week 5. And then I can go to week 6. Sorry, now I drill down into a day. This is when you talk and don't click precise. So now I click here, week 6, week 7. And then you saw already, I can take the mouse wheel and then zoom in and out. So I can really use this very nicely to kind of navigate in the schedule. On the left-hand side, we have like our capacities. And there we follow the standard business center hierarchy. So on the very top, we have the work center groups. So my sample company set up with production, assembly, finishing, subcontracting. And below that, we have the work centers. So if we look at assembly and finishing, under the work center groups, assembly and finishing, we have just work center. So here's the assembly team 1 and 2 and quality control. And let's look quickly at assembly team 2, how I set this up. So I double click here, and then there is 3 information that you put on a work center that we use to determine the capacity. And this is the final capacity. This is the capacity field. So we have a capacity of 3. We multiply this by the efficiency, and then we multiply this by the hours defined in the shop calendar. So here, shop calendar is 1. So very quickly look at this. So we look at this. So this is like a very simplified 1-shift calendar working from 8 to 4, Monday to Friday. And then we have the hours per day, we have the minutes per day, we have the seconds per day. And then we multiply this by the efficiency as percentage multiplied by capacity. And then we have the maximum capacity to load per day for every work and machine center. So we don't have any extra information for the VAPS, but we use standard business center capacity settings to determine the capacity. And we interpret the capacity of 3 in a way that we can assign a maximum of 3 production orders at a given point of time to that work center. Then when we go to production, it is more granular. I have work centers and then I have the machine centers. So pretty simple setup here. So then if I click on one of these boxes, one of these boxes represent the production order routing line, and then we see this blue dot. So maybe I click on the first operation here, and then you see this is a production order, and a production order typically has a couple of routing steps, and so each routing steps here is shown as one of these boxes, and then I know this is the first routing step, second routing step, third routing step, and so on and so forth. And so now there is one thing that stands out, and this is this yellow line here. And this yellow line is a virtual machine center that we add to every work center. We call it the standby resource. And the standby resource collects all those production orders that were created in Business Central or updated in Business Central, and that the production scheduler now has to take care of. So on the standby resource, we see production orders that were time scheduled by Business Central backwards from the due date, assuming infinite capacity. And now we have to bring them to the schedule against finite capacity. And so now this is the first production order that I have to bring into the schedule. And I have multiple options to do this. I can do this automatically. I can do this with one production order only. I can do this with multiple production orders automatically, or I can drag and drop it. So let's start with drag and drop, because this is the most simplest thing. So I can look at the, first of all, I have to understand where to put this, because I have 2 milling machines. So is it the Wagner or the TC Brother? Let me quickly look at the routing. So this has to go to the Wagner and then to the LC500 in gear cutting. So I can drag and drop this, and then I can look at the Wagner VSet and I think, pretty busy actually. So then I can expand this and I can say, well, I have a little gap here, so then I can squeeze it in here, but I need more time here than I had time left on the, or time free on that machine, so it pushes out all the others. And I can say, well, I can also go here and squeeze it in here, and then the others here, because it's finite capacity scheduling, are automatically pushed out. But squeezing these things in can have a lot of downstream effects. So whatever we change, get this gray dot, and now we see actually changes also in assembly, and we see changes in quality control, although I only made changes to milling and gear cutting. So squeezing it in always is like very tough and very brutal. So maybe we can do this in a more softer way without making so many changes to the schedule, because remember, the more changes you make to the schedule, the more inefficient the execution will be. And then you can see, okay, well, we actually know from the routing where to put it. And so we can ask the software, hey, can you show me, given the current schedule, when can I finish this at earliest? So we can actually tell the software, hey, I want to apply the routing. And when I say apply the routing, it looks on the machines defined in the routing at the earliest free spot without impacting the rest of the schedule. So we can squeeze it in here, but then we have to wait on the LC500. We have to wait for assembly, and then we finish in week 10, although the demand is in week 8. So then we can ask ourselves, isn't there a more clever way? Isn't there an alternative to completely destroying the schedule by squeezing it in and by putting it to the machine that is in the routing? And then we recognize that there's a gap in Business Central, because in Business Central, when you define the routing, you always have to define it goes to that machine center or goes to that work center, but there are no alternatives. And hence, with the VAPS, we actually have enhanced Business Central's data model, so that when you define the routings, you can also define alternative routing sets. So this column comes from the VAPS, and then we see for the first step, the milling can go to the Wagner, and it can go to the other milling machine. And we also have the capability to define production coefficients. So on the other machine, we are faster in setup, but we are much slower when we produce it. So we have less output per hour. But it might be still worthwhile, although the alternative machine is slower, it might be still worthwhile to consider it because we have a gap here. So in alternative to saying to the software, let's apply the routing, we can also say, let's apply the alternative routing, which means that we tell the software, please look at all allowed alternative work and machine centers where you have the earliest available spot, so that we finish the respective production order routing line at earliest. And if I say this, then we see actually, yes, we can use this gap, we can use this gap, we can use this step and this gap. And without disturbing the schedule, we now finish in week 7 way ahead before week 8. And so this is actually pretty cool. And now I come to the second part, the second thing I wanted to show you in the demo, and this is priority-based scheduling of multiple production orders, because you actually see that I have a lot of production orders here on standby, and I just let them show overlap because I'm not interested in the single production orders. Because what I just showed you was to make you familiar with some of the base principles of the VAPS. But in your customers, they don't want to go production order by production order, but they want to see a list of production orders or of the sales orders. They want to prioritize them, and then they want to schedule based on their priorities. So I will not prioritize by sales orders now, but I will prioritize by production orders. But the principle is the same. So now I see all production orders that are on standby. And the good news is this list can be filtered and sorted. And the sorting of this list represents the priority with which we scheduled. So the production order that is shown first will get scheduled first, then the next one, then the next one. So now I can say, hey, actually, I want to schedule the production orders with the small quantity first, or I want to schedule the production orders with the high quantity first, or I want to schedule the production order first that is due next, which makes pretty sense, actually. And the other good news is this list, this page is extensible. So you as a partner can add fields, custom fields from the customer to this page. so that the customer really can use their prioritization criteria. This is our standard business centered. So I sort it by due date, I prioritize by due date, and then I select them all and I say, okay, and then we will now schedule multiple production orders against finite capacity without violating the schedule, getting realistic completion dates. Pretty fast, pretty efficient, pretty automated. So this is really cool. This was the second thing I wanted to show you. The third thing is, now that I have my schedule, I want to understand if I have material availability issues. And how to identify material availability issues? Well, we have calculated the earliest material availability and we have this information here, but currently we are not showing it. Why we are not showing it? Because currently with the coloring, we focus on the production order status. So orange are the released ones, blue are the firm planned ones. But we can change the color, and we have multiple color options, and all color options are related with different tasks and different questions that the scheduling person can ask. And I'm now asking the question, hey, where are production orders where I have material availability issues? So I'm switching to the availability view, and then the coloring changes. And now I see green, a lot of green, cool, no issues. I see red and I see orange. And actually, didn't I say I want to schedule all production orders? Why the hell is this still on standby? This is still on standby because we have a very bespoke VAPS function. And this function leads to the fact that when I say actions schedule all, we leave those production orders on standby, where on the component lines, I have components that get where the demand gets fulfilled by purchase orders. And if on those purchase orders, the supplier has not yet confirmed the delivery date, then we say we do not want to schedule them and we want to highlight them in orange. Because for some customers that you have, it really makes no sense that they assign a capacity to a production order where the supplier has not yet confirmed the delivery date. So then we leave them just there. This is orange. And then we have this red guy. And let's look at this red guy in a little bit more detail. So I double click and I see I've set to start on the 14th and the earliest material availability date is the 16th. So how can this happen? There are two explanations. The one is, you saw when I did the drag and drop, I could squeeze in things and I could violate production runs that I scheduled earlier. So drag and drop is a super powerful control that we give you. And with drag and drop, because you just focus on one production on a routing line, we also give you the capability, or give your customers the capability to kind of break some limitation and constraints. And with drag and drop, we allow the customer to violate the earliest material availability date. This is one explanation how this can happen. Now let's look at the more realistic explanation. And for that, we need to understand where this earliest material availability date comes from. And this earliest material availability date was populated when I clicked EMAT allocation at the very beginning of the demo. And when we did this, we actually populated new information in the production order component line. So here I kept the example simple. We have 3 components needed to build this product. The first 2 components have an earliest material availability of the 31st of January, which is basically today. So we can assume that we have them on stock. And the third item has an earliest material availability of the 16th of February. So where does this come from? In order to understand this, we have to make an excursion to the item. So let's go to the item card. And then we see of that component, we have nothing on stock. The demand is from the only demand is from the production order component lines, and the only supply is from a purchase order or from purchase orders. So let's look at those purchase orders, and it is a purchase order. Let's look at this purchase order. And on this purchase order, we actually see that Who's Plus HF, who is our supplier, promised a delivery date of the 15th of February and then have 1 day of inbound warehouse handling time. So the expected receipt date is the 16th. So if my only supply of that item is that purchase order, then the earliest date that this material is available, the EMAT, is the 16th of February. So what happened? So what happened is, yesterday was a beautiful day, and I had some activity planned with my kids in the afternoon. So I did all my work. I completed it maybe at lunchtime, and I scheduled all my production orders. Yesterday, when I scheduled that production order that is red now, it was green, because yesterday we were under assumption that we get the material on the 8th of February. Then I made my job, I finished my schedule, and all was good. Then I went home, did some fun stuff with my kids, and today I came back into the office. And while I was enjoying some quality time with my kids, Who's Plus HF called my company and informed that they have delivery issues. Like we every day have delivery issues with every manufacturer that we talk to. So it's very simple, very day-to-day process. They inform, hey, look, we cannot keep the 8th of February, but we will deliver on the 15th of February. And then in my company, my colleagues in the purchasing department, they are super disciplined people. They updated the promised receipt date. So then this morning I came back, energized from a cool half day with my kids. I ran the earliest material availability date calculation again. I looked at my schedule, and what was green yesterday now is red, because we have delivery issues with the supplier. And now that I know it is the 16th, well, I can just move it into next week where I have the material available. Then some of the successors get moved, and then it should show in green. If we have a lot of production in the schedule that are impacted by late deliveries, of course, we also can say move to standby, and then we move everything with earliest material availability date conflict to standby, and then we can schedule them again based on material availability date. So that was the third thing that I wanted to show, how to identify material issues and how to solve them. So now let's go to the next step. And for that next step, I just need to have a new simulation, because I want to start from scratch for some reasons. So just give me this 50 seconds to create and use new simulation. And the last thing was, like, let's create new demands. And so here we have a new simulation. And now actually we create some new demands. So let me switch from the production scheduler to the sales guys. So now in parallel, somebody in my company is also selling. And let's create a new demand. And let's create whatever, the Canon group, purchases. Let's pick a random item. What do we have? Oh. Let's take that one. We produce 54. This is, by the way, my age, if you're interested in that. And the customer wants it on the 25th of February. Yeah. And of course, we have no available inventory for that. So now we have to create a production order from this. I skipped the part with the planning worksheet. So we create the production order now from the sales order directly. I create the production order. So now we have a firm plan production order 10/11/21. And we see that this sales order demand has a reservation to the supply, and that is the production order that we just created, and it's production order 10/11/21. So now let's go back to the schedule. And now you see, or you may have noticed, that the time scale, which was blue, turned into gray, and it says outdated. And this is because that production order 10/11/21, which I just created, is not part of the simulation, because when we do the simulation, we create a copy of the by then existing production orders, and this 10/11/21 did not exist. So first of all, I have to update the simulation and fetch new data that were added to Business Central while I was working on this schedule. And so now I have it. And by the way, a very cool function here is search. So let's search for 10/11/21. Here is the new firm plan production order. I click there and then it's blinking, it is highlighted, and we see it's here. So now let's look at this. Business Central, this is the demand date, the 25th. From here, Business Central gave it times backfit from this demand date. And if we look at the schedule, it will be really tough to meet this date, right? If we just start here. But anyway, we can apply what we just learned and we can say, apply alternative routing. So within all allowed alternatives, we look for the earliest possible time to complete. And then we see we can start here, but then it has to go to sawing. And after sawing on milling, there's a bottleneck. So it will be impossible to hold that date without disturbing the entire schedule. And in my company, we said, okay, if sales is making unrealistic delivery time commitments, then we should let them know. So now what I will do is I'm going to leave the simulation and I will publish this. And with this, I will violate with my production order demand date from the sales order. So basically, let me keep the simulation open. What I will do is, now look, we will finish the production order here in week 10. So we finish on whatever it is, the 7th or 8th of March. So what I will do is, let me go to the production order, because we have a reservation between the production order and the sales order. And what I will do is, I will change the ending date. So I will say, I want to change this, and this will be on the 7th of March. This is what I will do. And if I want to do this in Business Central, we get this wonderful message that we all love. There is an issue with the reservation. This change leads to date conflict with reservation. Undo this. So in Business Central, I cannot do this. In Business Central, I would first have to kill the reservation, move the sales order, then move the production order, and then re-reserve. Super manual stuff, super annoying. A lot of customers really in love with this process. So now let's do the same with the VAPS. I scheduled it, and I scheduled the production order to finish past the demand date. So now let's go out of the simulation. We saved the data in the simulation table, and now I press publish. And when we say publish, we write the data from the VAPS back into the production orders. So let me do this. Now I'm messing with the reservations and see what happens. I get a warning. Hello, with the due date for this, with the change. What I did is I changed the due date for one sales order line with the publish of that simulation. That means one or more production order lines now finish later than originally required by the corresponding sales order lines. Would you like to review them? Well, yes, of course. And then I, as a production owner, see that with this simulation, I messed around, or I changed sales order 36, where the old shipment date was the 24th of February and the new shipment date is the 8th of March. And not only me as the scheduling person get this, but my sales colleagues, they can run the sales line changes report, and then they see on the 17th of July at 9:54 German time, sales order 36 for that customer, that contact person, that salesperson got a change. So we very clearly can communicate. And now let's look at the production order again. Let's look at the production order 10/11/21 again. We changed the ending date. We kept the reservation intact. So everything, what Business Central requires us to do manually, everything happens behind the scenes. And this is also super powerful within the VAPS. So with that, let me quickly go back here. I showed you how to create a simulation with the VAPS. I showed you how we can schedule multiple production orders applying priority-based scheduling rules. We identified and solved material availability issues, and we determined a realistic delivery date from sales order, and I showed you how to communicate this back to your sales teams in a very efficient, integrated way. And with this, we, at the end of the webinar, I open it up for any kind of question. So if you have any question, if you have any concern, if you miss something, then please let me know. The chat pane is open. I didn't get any question so far, so it was either exciting or boring. Anyway, if there is no question now, but you have questions later, send me an email or ping me on LinkedIn. I'm super passionate about the VAPS, and I'm really, really happy to support you selling the VAPS to your clients and making some VAPS related business together. And with this, as there are no questions, thank you for this morning. Have a wonderful day. Take care and bye-bye.